Hi, this is Shay, a security infrastructure engineer, and we wanted to go ahead and give some information on software and supply chain risk management and how can we do to mitigate those issues. So we definitely want to have ensure that software assurances, expectations, needs include a lot of things that go through the software development process, and we want to make sure all those needs are satisfied in order to move through that seamlessly. So software assurance basically ensures that the development process is going as it should. So there's no sort of errors, and if there are errors, then we can go ahead and fix that ahead of time for that. So that basically manages the software development cycle. That has a couple of phases that it goes through to make sure that everything is correct and meets the client's expectations. For our organization in Australia, we're going to go ahead and make use of the prototype type model. This model would work best for our organization due to the requirements and not needing to be known ahead of time. So we don't need to know things that far in advance to go ahead and work on those as well. The good thing about this model is that it does involve a client to be more involved. That has a benefit because then they're able to see things as they progress, and if they want to make changes, then they can go ahead and make changes to that without waiting until they receive the software and then make the changes for it. So basically, it's good to be able to correct that early. The downside is that it can have a lot of users involved, and then it could result in a ton of changes, which could prolong the whole process for software development. Um, and then you want to look at the supply chain risk. It's a couple of things that could affect that. Basically, supply chain risk management is a planned effort to slow down or mitigate threats that would affect hardware, infrastructure components. And there's also like a cybersecurity supply chain risk management as well. Basically, that focuses more on the IT and Internet of Things side of it. So basically, there are things that like could affect our that are risks to us because we are kind of isolated per se. We would have to outsource a lot of software and a lot of different things that we may need to third party vendors. So that gives us a little less control of like our infrastructure and how we're going to do things. So that could pose a risk because we can't control every aspect of what the vendors are bringing in, and then they also could bring in vulnerabilities that we weren't aware of and didn't know before. One thing that did happen with the Domino's here in Australia, they had a security breach and then reported it as a system issue, when really it was a former supplier who leaked customer details. So it was a vendor that they were going through, and they leaked all kinds of personal information, and that's something that we do want to avoid. So that's probably our biggest risk when it comes to the supply chain. We do have different vulnerabilities as far as like the software. As we all know, Microsoft is a prominent software that is currently used by personal use businesses and government officials. With it being so popular, it does pose a lot of risk because more hackers or attackers are trying to get into Microsoft because that's what everyone's using. So the vulnerabilities are usually defined with a CVE that basically says what the vulnerability is, and if there is a way to mitigate it, it's usually in that CVE as well. Within our organization, we do have things that we do use like Snort and Wireshark that monitor network vulnerabilities. So basically, we're able to see these and ahead of time to try to mitigate those a lot faster. definitely want to recommend like antivirus software, based on that, the Snort and Wireshark protects things from the outside trying to get in. We do want to protect things on the inside. That's where the antivirus software comes in. So that's a must. I don't think that's a negotiable thing. So for recommendations, I definitely, have gone into detail on the briefing about, what the different options are for the operating systems. Basically, the three most popular ones are Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. My recommendation is to go with the Mac OS operating system due to the fact that it comes on nice hardware. Hardware is pretty good from being with Apple, and it lasts a relatively long time. It also gives us the option to fully boot with Windows or Mac OS. So you can either do this on the VirtualBox or virtual machine, that if that's an option that we set up for people, or in the software, Mac does have a boot camp, which you can install another operating system and run that as a whole on the computer that you're using. I do recommend Mac because Mac OS is really nice, and it's only available on Apple devices. So it's not like Windows or Linux where you can go out and purchase it, or you can go and get a copy and install it. You would have to have an Apple device in order to have Mac OS. And also with Mac OS, they tend to make their own software, so they have different software for different things. They have equivalent to Office Suite and Office 365. They have their own pages, their own numbers, and Keynote, which is basically PowerPoint, Microsoft Word, and Excel. So they have that. It's all developed, which basically, because they develop their own software, they don't have to worry about the outsourcing that we do, and it cuts down on vulnerabilities coming in from the outside. It's also a good Unix system for developers to use as well, so I recommend that. And because we are looking to potentially go into the Apple environment, I definitely recommend some softwares that are more compatible with Apple, because a lot of softwares have not caught up to the operating system of macOS. Some things are not available on certain softwares that would be available on Windows, so that could pose a problem. But there's other options out there. The difference is that those options aren't necessarily free. And so I definitely recommend Malwarebytes. I've used it before on my personal computer. It's really good. It just scans your system, and then it's proactive. If it finds anything wrong, then it blocks it, and it lets you know what it's blocking on there. It's relatively pricey, but I'm sure, being that it's a government organization, that we can look at a potential contract for that. The supply chain management tool I did recommend was a Vanguard Predictive Planning. It's a cloud-based platform that can assist with the idea of planning things that we need in the future, so cost, outsourcing, service level, etc. It, based on the reviews, is very easy to use, and it's not very complicated. And the pricing is to be determined based on, it's on a you have to contact a sales rep, and it's on a subscription base, so it's probably most likely on a yearly base. And lastly, as far as like to ensure that this is going well, as far as like on the contract language, I would recommend a mobile device management tool. The most popular one for Apple is Jamf. There's a Jamf Now option and a Jamf Pro option. Jamf Pro option gives you more things that you can deploy to the devices, as opposed to having to do it themselves. So like certs and addresses and emails, things like that, you'll be able to deploy more with Jamf Pro. So Jamf Pro is a little bit more expensive. It's typically based on the device and the devices and what you're using them for. So MacBooks are a little bit higher than iPhones for that. And how this would also work is that all these devices get enrolled in the Apple Device Enrollment Program, which is DEP. That basically puts all the serial numbers in a server. So when the user gets the computer and they open up the computer, they're going to get a message that said this is configured by the government of Australia, and it'll deploy like all the software that we're requiring to be on the computer. So the user doesn't have anything to do with that. They won't be able to change that. They won't be able to ignore that or delete that or anything like that. That's something that we manage here as the administrator, and they won't have any control of that. So it avoids any manual setup and any neglect on any software that is necessary for the device. So those are the recommendations that I do have for that, and you'll be able to read more of it in the debriefing.